In this video, I want to go into a little bit more detail on what was meant when I said that electrons are shared in a covalent bond. So before covalent bonds, we talked about ionic bonds. And one of the common examples of ionic bonds is sodium chloride. So recall that sodium has one valence electron and chlorine has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 valence electrons. And sodium is, if it can give this electron away, it will have 8 valence electrons. And chlorine, if it can accept one electron, if it can get another electron right here, then it will have 8 valence electrons. So sodium is very willing to get rid of an electron, and chlorine really wants to accept an electron. However, if you asked chlorine, hey, chlorine, can I have one of your electrons? Chlorine will say absolutely not. Chlorine is never willing to give away an electron. Chlorine does not want to give away an electron. It only wants to take electrons. So it works out really nicely between sodium and chlorine because sodium really wants to get rid of one, chlorine really wants to take one. So then they form this mutual agreement to where sodium will give one away, chlorine will take it, and they're both happy. Now, with covalent bonds, you might have, instead of sodium and chlorine, you might have, let's say you have chlorine and chlorine. So chlorine again has 7 valence electrons. And these two chlorines want to form a bond. They're totally capable of forming a bond, but not in the same way, because neither one of these chlorines is willing to give away an electron. They're both willing to accept an electron, but neither one is willing to give one away. So if they want to form a bond, they're going to have to do something differently. And so instead of one giving one away, where it look like that, because that doesn't help anything, because now one has 8, but the other has 6. This guy might be really happy, but this guy, he's furious. So that's not going to work. We need to do something else. Let's try, what if these chlorines, what if they can talk to each other and say, hey, I know that neither one of us is willing to give away an electron, but we both need an electron. What if we share these 2 electrons? And see what happens. So what's going to happen is these chlorines, let's move this over just a little bit. So we have these chlorines, and they decided that they want to share the electrons. So this electron and this electron, they're both going to share here and form a bond, and we'll talk more about that in a later video. But when they form this bond here, we're going to count this bond represented by a line, we're going to count it as 2 electrons for this chlorine and 2 electrons for this chlorine. So they end up sharing electrons by, originally, remember they had 1 electron each, or I guess they have 7 valence total electrons each, but they have that one on the side next to each other. And giving away is not going to help. If they steal it from each other, they're not going to let each other do that. So if they share it, though, then they will both have both of these 2 electrons. So we'll talk about it later, but we're going to represent, when we form a bond, we represent that with a line. And this line is going to represent 2 electrons for this chlorine and this chlorine.